So combating sounds a bit violent, but this is really about how to have an impact on violent right-wing extremist individuals and networks. That's going to be the focus of this presentation. And as Hans mentioned, at the Berlin office, we have really started digging into some of the details and structures of financing right-wing extremism with this report commissioned by the German Federal Foreign Office, a 5-country study where the financing, of course, was an important aspect. This led to something we did as a follow-up internally at CEP, going after these networks and network hubs and also entrepreneurs of extremism, individuals who play a key role in financing and managing and propagating in these different right-wing extremist milieus. We also then took a look at the online dimension, and I'm going to talk about this briefly in this presentation. And of course, there's this report that I'm just, I guess, featuring because we also looked into the right-wing extremists who went to Ukraine to fight either on the Russian or on the Ukrainian side. So a lot to read, if you like, over a boring weekend, maybe. So far, the idea when we look at terrorism financing, especially with an Islamist extremist perspective, is follow the money to some degree. And simply put, such a thing does not exist in combating, preventing right-wing extremism, violent right-wing extremism, terrorism. We're still in the phase of advocating for this approach in general, and by we, I mean NGOs and some governments, but overall, I would say this has not been established. We are still very much in a single case, single incident approach where something happens and then government reacts. And of course, there's other work going on intelligence-wise, but the follow the money approach that my colleague will surely talk later about to some degree is not present in this field here. Now, and this has led potentially, probably, to the narrative that there is no financial sophisticated strategy or activity within the broader right-wing extremist milieus. This could be in Germany or somewhere else. The overall narrative is these guys are self-funded. They take their salaries, they collect donations, and they do some small stuff on the side, but that's basically it. And what we did in this report regarding Germany is really look into long-term existing networks and actors, key actors, entrepreneurs of extremism that might look like myself, in the mid-40s to mid-50s, decades of experience, violence when in the youth, and then later on more strategic positions. And interestingly, if you look at these networks in Germany, there's a lot of connectivity. For example, there's legal advice, how to behave when there's a raid, which lawyers to call. There's advice on IT security. There's a lot of going on in sharing content between supposedly separate networks or individuals. And there's also a wide range of e-commerce activity, merchandise sales mostly. A lot of them have the same online trading platform they use. But the narrative is there are no financial networks, there's no tax evasion. This is not an area of concern. So this was basically the narrative until maybe last year in Germany and of course in many other countries. We're going to briefly now, I'm going to touch on these strategies and then dive in a little further. We have identified 6 strategies. So we combined it this way. Strategy 1 is the strategy everybody is referring to: self-financing, donations, membership fees, inheritances, and cryptocurrencies. Second one would be music concerts, white supremacy, hate music, and festivals. Then companies, this could be regular companies, restaurants, security companies, or merchandise stores and online stores. Combat sports events can also generate serious earnings. And real estate, obviously, buying real estate with money that was generated through the previous mentioned activities. And then there's organized crime. So starting with strategy 1, I recommend reading our report or that well-done report by the Financial Action Task Force from June 21, just as a news piece from January 31st, or just last week. Crowdfunding is something that is still very much in season, so to say, for right-wing extremists. This is referring to crowdfunding in the United States. So this is that part, and I'm not going to dive into this because there's a lot of research and literature already existing. The second part is the music concerts and festivals. And of course, music has different objectives or functions in that scene. One is to share narratives, to have camaraderie, to have these big events or small events where brothers and like-minded people connect through music and, of course, also lyrics that are often offensive, if not illegal. So here we have Hammerskins on the left in Italy or the US. We have Hammerskins concerts on the right, that's France. And then on top here are some of the bigger festivals with up to 6,000 participants and turnovers around 300,000 euros estimates. That's the detailed estimate is in that Germany report. And earnings also around winnings in terms of what they can take home after deducting all the cost, between 100 and 150,000 euros. So then we have, of course, as mentioned, companies. There's a string of security companies where right-wing extremists are founders, CEOs, or then, of course, enforcers. We have merchandise stores. Some of them are mainstream, like on Etsy. We have white hand-made soaps, very important, it seems, which hands made the soap that right-wing extremists wash their face with. We have on the top right crossbows and other survival prepper, also can be used for attacks, of course, fashion, restaurants, T-shirts, right? So here it depends on the country, it depends on the actor, on the store, on the strategy, how much money is generated, but there is money. Combat sports events, on the left, you see a bunch of friendly-looking, violent right-wing extremists, combat sports activists. You have Russians here, Germans, and French. In the middle, that's from an event just last week in Germany, close to Leipzig. This looks like a mainstream event, but as Robert Klaus says, who is the key expert on this subject in Germany, when you see an advertisement for combat sports mixed martial arts events and everyone is white, then this is probably a white supremacist event, because the combat sports scene is diverse, right? So this is also, then you see on top, it says Black Rainbow Security. That's been a company, I think, that's been for 13 years active in this field with violent right-wing extremists being affiliated, associated, or obviously running that company. We have on the right side White Rex. This is significant because part of the White Rex, that's this guy who calls himself Denis Nikitin, a mixed martial arts activist, Russian-born, raised in Germany, living in Ukraine, and is now fighting in Ukraine. And he and his friends are fighting there with the weapons that are available, and he's posting that on his Telegram channel. And then there's Kampf der Nibelungen on the bottom right. So these are events from a couple of dozens to a couple of hundreds participants, but there's also money to be made. And then, of course, we have real estate. And this is probably how the dream real estate of a right-wing extremist looks like: a fortress. There's also this quote where somebody says, we need real estate as fortresses in enemy territory, right? So this is how they see themselves, defenders of the white race, blah, blah, blah. And this is how it sometimes ends. So they buy real estate, and then there can actually be attacks against their real estate. So there's this issue of safe spaces. But of course, if you have a lot of cash-based activities like concerts, festivals, combat sports events, and you're an enemy of society, an enemy of state, and you need to launder your money, buying real estate might be a smart thing to do. So there's definitely a strategy of buying real estate in Germany, in the US, and in other places. Now, this now is organized crime, and that's a preview to a study that we've been doing for the German Federal Foreign Office that's going to be published mid-March. And this is about the linkages between right-wing extremism, violent right-wing extremism and terrorism, and organized crime. So OC is organized crime. And this is just a quick teaser. On the right here, you see the organized crime actors, for example, outlaw motorcycle gangs, some Hells Angels chapters, some Bandidos chapters, United Tribunes. There's dozens actually who have a proven track record of being involved in some of these or all of these activities. You have the classic mafia, Italian mafia, Armenian mafia, German mafia, whatever. They all need businesses to launder the money, right? So when you sell drugs, and you've all seen the TV shows on Netflix or somewhere else, there's a big problem when your basement is full of cash, but it doesn't have a track record of being legitimate. So you buy a restaurant, or you buy real estate, or you run a brothel, or you run a gym, and you bring that money in and you pretend that there's more business than actual is. And in that process, you get supposedly clean money. So on the right-wing extremist, violent right-wing extremist side, we have a group that's called Turonen. We have a group in Germany. We have a group in Austria that is supposedly dissolved, but there's currently investigations if they're still operating. And there's two groups in Poland, actually, that actually do the same things. And of course, the crime-terror nexus has been researched to a degree, but with a sole focus on Islamist extremism, terrorism, and organized crime. And I think our study is the first one who looks at the right-wing extremist terrorist side. As I said, it will be presented mid-March, and we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy. So the online dimension is interesting because there is this narrative that the visible right-wing extremist key actors and groups have been kicked off, deplatformed from the big social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So we did some research in November 21. This report was published. It's in German, but we have an English summary, where we realized and highlighted and exposed that a lot of these key extremist actors, right-wing and violent, are still on the platforms, but they're not committing illegal acts there. So they follow a strategy which I call extreme normalization. So they post vacation pictures or what they had for lunch, like everyone. But then they always have the link to their web shop, which then leads directly to examples buying machetes or crossbows or T-shirts for girls. And this is something that is not properly handled by the big companies, and we've been very active here. It's not about illegal content, and also these guys are not proscribed. These are people who have the key actors I mentioned at the beginning, entrepreneurs, 10 or more years of experience, still use the platforms to make money. But the terms of service of these platforms say we don't allow violence-oriented right-wing extremists on our platform. So this is a terms of service issue, not a legal, illegal issue. But still, it's one way how they make their money. So, assessment. The absence of data in many of the countries. I mean, I've quickly looked who's with us here today. It's probably dozens of countries represented here. In most of those countries, you will not find a lot of data on violent right-wing extremist financial strategies and activities. This could mean that there's nothing happening there. It could also mean that an absence of targeted and systemic law enforcement investigations following this follow the money approach into this phenomenon is the reason why there's nothing to see, right? Because there is, in general, a lack of up-to-date research, in-depth analysis on the actual financial strategies. And we're not saying that they're professional financial wizards everywhere, but there are some in the countries we've looked into. And that's why there's a big chance that in other countries, this might also be happening. There's some good news. The Germans introduced a new strategy. Until last year, I would say the general approach in Germany was like in any other country. You look at the single incidents. There's a case of violence. There's a case of illegal activity. There's investigations. Then there's a court case. And then that's it. You look at the people you might be able to put in jail, not regarding the bigger network and what they're doing apart from what they're being arrested for. So, but now there has been a change last year, where they're now trying to really go after networks, specifically mentioning concerts, festivals, music products, combat sports events, e-commerce stores. And we're proud and happy to say that we contributed to this development. However, the strategy does not mention illegal activities and references to organized crime, but still, this is a great step in the right direction. So recommendations. We think there needs to be some sort of national coordination mechanism. This could be working groups or something else, where there's a frequent exchange what the key actors of violence-oriented right-wing extremism in a respective country are doing. These entrepreneurs of extremism that have been doing this for a long time. And to achieve that, we recommend to create joint task forces, right? Right-wing extremists and financing experts, meaning you would have to have in law enforcement, which usually is structured in silos, right? You have one department that is responsible for general crime, you have one department that does organized crime, and you have one department that does politically motivated crime. And they usually don't cooperate. And this is one of the problems. This is how silos could look like, right? So you would have no connection between the three. And this is what we need. We need the silos of responsibility and focus to cooperate, to investigate if there are professionalized right-wing extremist financial activities, not just in Germany and in some other countries, but maybe also in your country. But the way law enforcement is structured, they are not supposed to connect the dots. So if a right-wing extremist individual or group is being arrested for dealing with drugs, this case will, in most cases, be handled as a drug crime. And it doesn't matter if that person has a swastika on their head. It just will be a drug crime. And there's also no statistic then that shows that right-wing extremists are dealing with drugs, because it's either or. And as long as there's no connection between the silos of responsibility, and this is why we need to include also tax authorities. So this would be law enforcement, organized crime, and politically motivated crime, prosecutors and tax authorities to really identify what's there, and if something's there, investigate it properly. And one way to do this is look at the EU administrative approach that has been developed to investigate organized crime networks, right? So this display here in the center, it would be the individual prosecution. This is the single case approach. Maybe in some cases there's a ban order designation for an organization, but the administrative approach then would look, what are their supposedly legal businesses? Right? So people that are in leadership positions of violent right-wing extremist groups, and then there are members of these groups that deal with drugs, for example, or do other illegal activity, the prosecution now would only look at the individuals, I'm generalizing, who are doing the crime. They would not look into the leadership, and if so, just briefly, and they would surely not look into the legal activities, supposedly like running restaurants or running security companies, to see if there's a money laundering circle or a wider network. So there are some lessons to be learned from this approach, which exists also in many or in some EU member states. So to sum this up, these task forces should, if structures are identified, if key actors are identified, to prioritized and coordinated tax audits. I would assume that they are not eager to pay their taxes properly. And this might lead to the uncovering of illegal activities and also to the opportunity of confiscating financial assets, for example, those pretty castles. And what we also need is specialized training programs for municipalities and, let's say, people on the line that deal with permits, that deal with for events, for example, who on the local level, that they are aware of who might be active in their area of responsibility, again, in terms of key actors, right? So they might have restaurants there, they might do concerts there, and maybe the local municipality is not really aware who these guys are because they have a broader network. So this is training and informing the municipalities seems to be another very important point from our end. That was that. Thank you very much.